I will proceed with today's information. Besides talking about seed group 2, the trained observers, which is today's topic, a general theme of today's talk is about influences on humanity. So you want to, whatever we talk about today, just kind of be concerned about the concept, or not concerned, but think about the concept of influences on humanity as sort of a backdrop. Today I'll be addressing the following topics. Talk about what is known as the stage of the Forerunner, GK talked about, Alice Bailey. We'll talk about the concept of influential subjective forces. We'll be talking about conclaves. I brought that up last month, and so we'll talk about it in more detail today. We'll talk about conclaves and their purpose and their importance. And then we'll get into talking about the specific seed group number 2, the trained observers, and continue a little bit with information about the new emerging vision.
Put your hand up. You can't see your whole face.
Okay, so let's continue here. The stage of the Forerunner. At the Conclave of 1925, the masters noted there were numerous service groups and individuals who were not connected or working with a united purpose. After the 1925 conclave, these disparate groups were defined and charged with the purpose of bringing coherence and connectedness between all service groups. Hierarchy also acknowledged there existed a kernel of spiritual understanding and expression of the outer 10 seed groups. So since the 1925 enclave, GK used the term stage of the Forerunner to refer to the increased activity on the inner planes between the hierarchy and the service workers in their work towards implementing the plan. This has been a time of spiritual activity, and that will last until the next hierarchical enclave in 2025. That's in under 4 years. The service workers, in cooperation with the hierarchy, have accomplished much, but hierarchy still has objectives they are still wanting to work out, and that are ongoing. And some examples of some of the activities going on that are still going on. Before the coming potencies of the Aquarian age can be effectively employed, humanity must break down all barriers of separateness, isolation, and prejudice that are keeping men apart from each other. This is in reference to neutralizing those ideologies that have forced or imposed their will on humanity by assertive governments and corporations. This has caused humanity to largely focus on all aspects of the form nature through misinformation. The service workers act as transmitters of living lines of truth between hierarchy and humanity, and are raising the mental life of human consciousness of the everyday man and woman to a high functioning capacity and away from the current astral polarization.
Put your hand up. You can't see your face.
The service workers are helping to bring awareness to each nation, and must take responsibility or realize its responsibility and interrelationship by evoking ideas and higher spiritual values such as cooperation and goodwill and right human relations through all the 10 service groups. Remember, I'm using service group, 10 service groups, and 10 seed groups interchangeably.
Move the camera so you can see your face. So I can see your face.
Okay. These ideas are about sharing of resources, both politically and economically, and for creating a basis for inaugurating an era of peace and abundance for all. This is essentially a fourth ray action of bringing order out of chaos. With this awareness, it develops a sense of internationalism and allows people in the political, economic, and intercultural communication sectors the ability to grasp world affairs and the effects on them. Also helps with bringing forth awareness about the effects of climate change, and even here in the present, information about the spread of the coronavirus. Eventually, the higher impression of goodwill, working together in cooperation, and a tendency toward unity will result in a paradigm shift in consciousness, where humanity will be reoriented from an emotional reactivity to a more mental understanding towards life. As a result, this would move humanity towards practicing right human relations in all its activities. There's much evidence people and groups of many nations want to unify. They want to create alliances and work in cooperation towards a common goal. While it is interesting to note that the actions and activities of the service workers originated in the subjective realm, we might also ask, what is the practical benefit of this information? And do we really have influence on events in our lives or in the world? The simple message I'm conveying is our thoughts and actions do influence the world, whether it is through individuals or groups, such as through political intercourse between nations, activities between corporations, economies, and intercultural relations by scientists, educators, and the arts. Subjective influences. Servers participating in world transformation during the stage of the Forerunner, whether conscious of it or not, are invoking thought forms, ideas, and impressions from the subjective realm or inner planes by turning them into creative solutions on the outer planes. Subjective ideas implemented by the service workers are helping to guide humanity in seeing the limitations and destructive nature of selfishness, greed, bigotry, materialism, and all its manifestation. They are active in all the seed groups. Although these ideas ultimately aid in the redemption and upliftment of humanity, the thought forms of the service workers ironically come into conflict with those who hold on to materialism and the form nature. As a result, this causes friction, tension, and crisis in the political, social, cultural, and economic sectors of society around the world by those who are wanting to implement the spiritual energies of goodwill, cooperation, understanding, and tolerance into the public's mind. Through this mindset, the political, economic, and social environment can be influenced by the values we accept and live by. Inevitably, they will create a spiritually oriented civilization based on right human relations and a natural outcome with we will work it out together attitude. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
I don't see any or hands up or anything yet.
No problem. Okay, we'll continue. 3 types of force. As mentioned in last month's talk, there are 3 types of force clashing in the world today. DK talks about, DK or Alice Bailey, in Treatise on White Magic, they talk about the 3 forces. The first one being or emanating from the holders of the old tradition, who emphasize the forms and the past, which produces the destruction of those forms. That is, those who resist or reject all forms of change. They want to keep the status quo. The second force is emanating from the inner group of mystics. Mystics is a term that DK used, who, under the guidance of the planetary hierarchy, are building the new thought form and structures. The third force he talked about was emanating from the masses of humanity who belong to neither group and who are wielding force as yet blindly and often unwisely. This can create chaos in society. until such time as they recognize those constructive channels into which it can be wisely poured. For this to happen, there needs to be spokespersons to guide the unknowing public in the right direction. Conclaves, a gathering of masters, and also a method of decision and transformation.
David,
Yes, go ahead.
sorry, Yvonne's got her hand up.
Oh, go ahead. Does she want to?
No, I didn't really have it up. I was trying to see what this reactions button did.
David, we're seeing all of your notes and everything.
I know that we don't have any control of that.
Okay.
We're fine.
No, I don't really have my hand up. I was trying to figure out how to do that with the reactions button. So I'm sorry.
Okay, I put it down for you.
No
Thank you.
worries. No worries. Continuing with conclaves, a method of decision and transformation. I mentioned conclaves before. What is a conclave? Conclave is a gathering of the masters on the higher planes, at least the Buddhic plane and above, or plane of intuition, where they determine humanity's progress for taking the next step in its evolution and whether it is ready, whether humanity is ready to receive new impulses. The hierarchy takes a long view for changes in the evolution of human consciousness, not just in short human years or a single lifetime, but spans centuries, perhaps even millennia. This broad view constitutes the field of active service for the service workers for carrying out goals and objectives of the plan. The hierarchy needs the service workers of the world as their hands and feet or agents of change on the lower 18 subplanes on the physical plane. Each new impulse from the hierarchy comes forth as the will to good from Shambhala as it manifests as crises for mankind. So what happens is Shambhala representing the will to good, and wrapped within that will to good is the expression of will, the pure expression of will, the pure expression of love and wisdom together, and the principle of active intelligence. And that energy is transmitted directly to the hierarchy, and they step down this information to humanity through impression mainly. So I mentioned crisis. Crisis hastens certain impulses and realizations that the hierarchy has set in motion. Once the precipitation of a crisis is complete, there are those who will act upon the impulse and become change agents. That is, the service workers or the seed groups will bring forth a new impetus or thought form or idea outwardly to move the plan of evolution forward. At that time, the masters and the ashrams will give their full assistance to those seeking to aid humanity towards correct lines. Correct lines is a term that DK used himself. The good news, as indicated by Alice Bailey, is that the latter part of the 20th century and into the 21st century, the activity of humanity itself, for the first time, is concerned with the entire subject of right human relations and how to bring it about. This means that humanity is responding to the will of Shambhala. Earlier conclaves and their outcomes. The Tibetan states that since 1425, the hierarchy has met in conclave at the 25th year of each century. To get a sense of previous impacts, let's briefly review the conclaves from 1425 to 1925 and see how some of the resultant effects on humanity. In the early 15th century, that is 1425, 600 years ago, mankind was fragmented and emerging from the Dark Ages. This is a metaphor for the limited amount of light or knowledge or wisdom impacting human consciousness at that time. At the Conclave of 1425, hierarchy decided it would reappear in the year 2025. The third ray, or the expression of the third ray, began to manifest. Gutenberg invents the printing press, prints the first Bible, and this provided a stimulation of the lower mental plane. To the masses, albeit limited, on other fronts, there was social and religious change, and new trade routes opened up, which resulted in the beginning of the age of discovery for Europeans, and this all resulted in an expansion of consciousness. Now, to be fair, the emerging from the Dark Ages is a term that largely refers to the European nation states in the European continent. There was already an age of enlightenment happening in the Middle East, in Iran, what we call Iran today, and also with the Chinese civilization. And that goes back at least to the 11th century. For the conclaves of 1525 to 1725, hierarchy's objective was to hasten the urge to integration and to produce synthesis and unification in a world of thought and allow the higher divine life into being. They saw great explorations of the physical world, which resulted in the Age of Discovery by Da Vinci, Copernicus, Galileo, and Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon, who founded the scientific method. They inaugurated an era of intelligent thought through inquiry and discovery. So the mental plane of humanity became to be stimulated. The majority of humanity, of course, was still foundering with their animal nature and aspiring toward coming toward their astral, emotional, and energy and expression. With the age of enlightenment of reason, this awakened human consciousness to the recognition of its essential freedom by philosophers such as Descartes, Spinoza, Jefferson, Voltaire, and Rousseau. And we saw the seventh ray influence began as an influence in 1675. At the Conclave of 1825, humanity was impulsed by an outpouring of the Christ consciousness and a tendency toward goodwill, cooperation, and the energies of will began to impact human consciousness. The worldly influences from the 19th into the 20th century were the spread of idealism, the creation of labor welfare movements for the common good and human betterment. There was the rise of industrialization, or the age of industrialization began in Europe predominantly, and which resulted in increased productivity, prosperity, and urbanization. There was also the Darwinian understanding of man's form nature, and it became the prevailing scientific philosophy. From the esoteric side, there was the spread, this is the 19th century now, the spread of esoteric knowledge of the masters and the hierarchy gave to humanity the concept of discipleship and initiation. And this came into the public's knowledge for the first time. Before that, it was basically very, very secret. It was quite occult. And only certain people and certain groups, very isolated from humanity, knew about these ideas. You saw Helena Blavatsky publishing The Secret Doctrine, and there was the birth of 3 esoteric schools: the Theosophical Society in 1875, Agni Yoga Society in 1920, and the Arcane School and the Lucis Trust in 1923. Now, I note that these are positive developments for mankind, but we should not forget in the background, which means the background of history going back centuries, there were great problems of war, cruelty, and abuse. With the emergence of light and evolutionary change, it brought great friction, and there was a great friction that countered it with the light also. So you have these things that cause a great stimulation in human consciousness for the age of discovery, the age of enlightenment, great inventions and discoveries took place. And this also caused, with the rise of technology, which I'll go into a little bit more, caused also stimulation and tensions within society, interestingly enough. Are there any comments or questions at this point?
No, I still don't see anything there.
All right. Continuing. So the last conclave that humanity was influenced by was in 1925. And that's basically 1925 to the present here in 2021. Due to the outpouring energies and impacts from hierarchy and Shambhala, the following developments have taken place since 1925. We saw the formation of the New Group of World Servers, which I shortened to say the service workers. Hierarchy decided that the service workers should become builders of the new age. And they are guided by hierarchical impulse and ashramic purpose. In the early 1930s, the concept of the 10 seed groups or service groups and their ashramic influence on the physical plane was identified and founded. The actual year was 1931, according to GK. This has been a time for the inflow of the Christ principle or love wisdom and the inflow of the will energy from Shambhala to influence man's thinking and activities. This resulted in the creation of movements toward peace, goodwill, philanthropic effort, and awakening of the masses of men around the issues of brotherhood. Approximately 1960s to the present, we saw the emergence of disciple leaders who were beginning to appear through what was actually called the human potential movement. It's a period of building of esoteric networks, and philosophic perspectives are expanding. And we've seen an expansion of the concept of purification of the inner self by personal cleansing of Maya, glamour, and illusion. Many spiritual paths are thriving. So you're seeing many, many groups. It isn't just, if you take the main religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hindu, Buddhism, they all talk about the concept of purification. And they're all in their own right. They're dealing with the problems that have resulted in Maya, glamour, and illusion. Using their own vocabulary, it causes people to be challenged, to go through their changes, and to come to realize who they are spiritually. We've still got a long way to go, needless to say, but these are ideas that emerged in the 20th century that we're still working with today. Other parallel activities and developments in civilization from 1925 to the present also related to the stage of the Forerunner. We saw the discovery of nuclear power and space exploration begins. We saw, or there was a rise in concerns around population growth and new concepts of sustainability and the awareness of the possibility of planetary extinction coming forth regarding man's abuse of the physical plane, environment, and all the kingdoms. There's been a revolution of mass communication, like this Zoom call, for example, is part of that, and has resulted in the birth of inventions and technology that affects the mental plane of mankind. During this time, we've seen the development of TV, radio, internet, computer, social media, and the mobile phone, and their resultant influence on civilization. There's been a dramatic expansion of medical knowledge, positive attitude and improvement of the self. This has resulted in the awareness and the need for physical fitness, yoga, and meditative practices has become mainstream, including even much of the vocabulary, like the concept of mindfulness. We saw in the 20th century, we saw great movements that were founded on civil rights, voting and women's rights, education for all, and environmentalism. These all equate to an externalization of subjective ideas and concepts that help to unify humanity. Any questions or comments on this?
No, nothing so far.
All right. So let's talk now about seed group number 2, the trained observers. Esotericists know that the astral plane, like a thick fog, is made up of the energies of glamour and illusion. The primary objective of the trained observer is to penetrate the fog of the astral plane with a bright light of the soul. By bringing the soul's light into dark places, or dark thoughts and discussions, it provides direct knowledge, truth, understanding, and right interpretation. To do this work, the trained observer employs right observation of events and situations and withdraws him or herself from the center of activity of events of the lower 18 subplanes. He becomes the observer and then radiates truth from the soul level. And of course, when I make statements like this, I'm speaking about the ideal, which DK and Alice Bailey talked about. For this work, the trained observer must have the ability to simultaneously live as a soul in the world while not being identified or attached to the things or events on the physical plane. An example of the trained observer in today's world is the activity of the journalist, predominantly in the broadcast and the print media. He or she takes the thought form already in the mainstream media and national conversation and openly discusses them, dispassionately and objectively, with the intention of presenting facts about a person, situation, or event using various technologies in the global media, such as TV, social media, and the internet. And social media, of course, we're talking about like Zoom, what we're using right now, could be Facebook, Instagram, etc., Twitter. So when enough trained observers are coming from a place of, quote, truth, they will not only break up existing Maya, glamour, and illusion, but also dissipate ancient and pernicious thought forms, such as warlike tendencies, energies of hate, and separativeness. They will act as a bridge with forces emanating from the soul level, and I'll be expanding on the concept of truth shortly. This type of focus aids the hierarchy in working with advanced service workers and initiates to reconcile conflicts existing between the left and the right-hand paths, and will involve working with the pairs of opposites on the astral and the mental planes. Communicating truth. Someone once said, truth ought to be presented in such a way that it convinces without binding, and that it may appeal even without convincing. And only the language of the heart can accomplish this. For the journalist or communicator, the primary tools for communication are TV, internet, blog sites, social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and many more. Regardless of the country, people that are using these instant communication forms, it is a means for spreading thought forms and ideas around the world. Referring to the possible function of the media within society, in 1971, US Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black commented regarding the release of the Pentagon Papers by the New York Times. He said, in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, the founding fathers gave the free press the protection it must have to fulfill its essential role in our democracy. The press was to serve the governed, not the governors. The government's power to censor the press was abolished so that the press would remain forever free to censure the government. The press was protected so that it could bear the secrets of government and inform the people. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government, and paramount among the responsibilities of a free press is the duty to prevent any part of the government from deceiving the people. That's quite a remarkable statement and bears repeating in today's media, considering all that's been going on in the last number of years. With so many forms of technology in today's world to choose from, many are using them to spread higher truths and values through podcasts, websites, Zoom webinars, and conferences. However, the opposite is also happening with those who have the intent of spreading lies and deception, thus subverting truth. Trained observers' work here is to operate with a detached and dispassionate mind and communicate the truth objectively in the global media and the political arena.
David,
Yes, go ahead.
Heike says the internet is bringing dark places to light for all humanity today, so that the need for bringing light into the mass media, social networks, YouTube, etc., becomes very obvious.
Yes, that is totally correct. And as much as somebody says, oh, well, there was no insurrection that took place on January 6th in the United States Capitol. And there are some people who still say that. And there are other people saying, yes, there was. And by definition, that was sedition, and the legal words and the legal terminology. So countering those two things there are basically, you're countering two different forces, the force of light and the force of the darkness, or the force of the light of truth or the light of the deception. So we're working with those energies esoterically. And yes, the internet is definitely, among all the different other forms of social media, is a means for, interestingly enough, causing a tension. The tension, the force of truth, the force of cooperation and goodwill in place of separatism. These are energies that affect people and stimulate people, and they cause friction because people have not adjusted to the concept of brotherhood yet and bringing forth unity in all humanity. So this is what we're continually working on. Discerning truth. Oh, any other questions or comments?
No, that's all I see at this time.
Great. The masters consider the astral plane as non-existent, as they have completely transcended it. However, for the everyday person, the astral plane is as real as the physical world, and thus it becomes an obstacle in preventing energies from the plane of soul or the higher planes where the masters reside from reaching the mind of man. The astral plane, like a thick fog, is made up of the energies of glamour and illusion, or mistruths and deceptions. The fog can be penetrated with the bright light of the soul, resulting in direct knowledge, truth, understanding, right interpretation pouring forth, and the world of causes is revealed. From this, the trained observers see the quality, the purpose, and significance and meaning. That's again the ideal, that they will see those things and talk about them in the media. The essence of what the trained observer does is communicate truth. So again, what is truth? And here is one definition from Google. Truth is right understanding and interpretation of information or events of that which is true or in accordance with fact and reality, such as scientific truths. In essence, it is the opposite of a falsehood. Service workers' work involves protecting the spirit of truth and for creating the mental conditions where the mind of man could become receptive to an increasingly greater light. They act as a living link and transmitters of energy between hierarchy and humanity to raise the mental life to a high functioning capacity to allow energies such as buddhi from the soul and the spiritual triad to flow unimpeded. So understanding the concept here of the allowing the energies of Buddhi to flow from the soul. Buddhi comes from the plane of the intuition. When the when the person is in meditation, he or she does not necessarily understand the concept of Buddhi, but when they go into a deep meditation, they can come, they cross the mind of the soul, they connect with the soul and the abstract mind. These are terms in the Bailey teachings. And then they connect with the higher mental plane. That mental plane extend a line into the plane of the intuition. And when that happens, when you get very still and you still all your thoughts and all your ideas and anything comes into your mind, and you you're just completely present with your higher self, you can pick up energies from the plane of the intuition. And this is Buddhi. And that energy ultimately, when you become disciplined and trained in meditation, or you become very adept at it, you start bringing forth Buddhi into your consciousness and you are redeeming the lower energy of the astral body, and you're replacing it with Buddhi. And so therefore, higher concepts of truth, expanded awareness, pure love and awareness, and pure reasoning comes forth.
David?
Yes.
Olga, she says, may we say that observers are spiritual journalists?
I would say that certainly is a possibility, and it being the concept of the observer, which is a whole talk in its own right, but the concept of the observer, for example, a broadcast journalist, like you see one of the pundits on television, they are well researched on their particular subject, whether you agree with it or not, but they're still real well researched, and they have a certain observation of events and situations on the lower 18 subplanes, and they're observing it from their point of view and understanding. A person who's in meditation can also be the observer, and they can observe their own thought forms and their own energies, and they can document in their mind or take note. They can write down and certainly journal, whatever, write about, and they can certainly do that too. So being the observer is ideally a person who will become dispassionate and also stand back and observe what's going on without having, quote, an opinion, which is part of the personality. Forces of deception. Last month, I mentioned service workers are aligned with the evolution of consciousness. But those who are aligned with lies and deception are facilitating the work of the forces of darkness, or the forces of involution. This focus will help keep humanity stuck on the lower 18 subplanes, particularly through all phenomena of the form nature. And the lower 18 subplanes is par excellence the location where Maya, glamour, and illusion reign supreme. From externalization of the hierarchy, the Tibetan says the forces of darkness, or the Black Lodge, as he calls them, are powerful energies bringing blindness to the peoples and to feed the existing fires of hate, separateness, and criticism. Hence, they are the forces of crystallization, and they hold back the forces of evolution and progress for their own ends. And what are some of the tactics of the Black Lodge? When new positive initiatives come up, such as providing equal rights and health care to minorities or women, or enacting environmental regulations to counter pollution and environmental abuse, the Black Lodge counters with doubt to maintain the status quo and to keep power as an effort to thwart change. This is in reality an attack against people putting forth more evolved ideas and thought forms. By their actions, this results in all that is nurturing, protecting, and life-giving is blocked. Let's look at one example: climate change, or the idea of climate change. The United Nations and most countries around the world have conducted scientific studies and conclude the world is already experiencing the effects of severe climate change. However, in the United States, many conservatives say climate change is a hoax, or that the science is neither there or is ambiguous. Upon entering office in 2017, then President Trump relaxed regulations that regulate the coal and oil industries and allowing them essentially to pollute at will. This was also the policy under George W. Bush in 2001. And to this day, virtually all legislation to curb pollution or impose restrictions on industry are blocked. It is interesting to note that separate reports from the Pentagon, the CIA, NASA, and NOAA, that is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, United States agency, and the Advisory Committee for the Sustained National Climate Assessment, created under President Obama in 2015, run counter to politics of the conservatives and acknowledge the world's climate is changing, and that all of the reports indicate climate change will affect national security and the United States economy, not to mention the world's economy, and kill thousands of Americans unless measures are taken. From stories in the news of a continual changing world, a person who is aligned with his soul will know what is truthful through his or her own ability for discernment and intuitive response. The service workers realize that deception is a form of force, glamour, and illusion cast onto the public's mind. Remember, when the pundits are talking about a particular issue or situation or event, they're engaging in a national conversation about something that's already existing, and they are manipulating the information about that event or situation. In essence, it is the work of forces who do not want humanity to progress and want to stall or put off the implementation of the plan. Any comments or questions anybody has at this point?
No, I don't see anything right now.
All right. So, media influence and deception in the post-truth era. Media outlets in today's world have pundits or talking heads. And their purpose ideally is to be representative of a national conversation by objectively analyzing and talking about current issues from different angles. Although many of the pundits strive to provide objective reporting, certain news organizations often editorialize or place undue divisive and distorting overtones on the news instead of reporting it dispassionately and objectively. This type of news broadcast is not interested in facts, but wanting to promote an emotional response in the viewer. This type of news is called post-truth. So let's talk about a couple of personalities who have had a strong influence in the last 100 years with this type of post-truth activity. This type of reporting can be traced back to the 1920s and earlier, where you have someone, Edward Bernays, who was the father of public relations and the nephew to Sigmund Freud. He wrote on how to influence society and the public opinion using advertising images, words, slogans, and news headlines. He used techniques to influence individuals' free will, thoughts, fears, and desires for economic and political gain. He was very famous, actually, in the 20s and 1930s for initiating ads in the American media called Torches for Freedom. Torches for Freedom, referring to cigarettes, and that women can smoke cigarettes. And so there were all sorts of ads depicting women smoking. And this was a form of, quote, liberation for women then. And that was a form of manipulation. In the decades that followed, 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s forward, the American Tobacco Company, the Nazi Party, the CIA, advertisers, and politicians took notice and profited at the expense of the public by manipulating people's emotions, desires, and weaknesses. And certainly this is happening to this very day in the media. certain aspects of the media. The message here is that the trained observer needs to insulate him or herself from the glamours and illusions by being well-read, practicing discernment and discrimination with information from whatever source it is received. Again, we're talking about the higher spiritual possibility and the potential for this seed group. And just not to be outdone, a generation before Edward Bernays with William Randolph Hearst, the great media mogul. He was actually in many historical references, he's considered to be the first media mogul of this nation, of the United States. And he started back in the late 19th century, where he came from a very wealthy family. And if you can imagine, he basically had an unlimited source of money. So he bought some newspapers and he used the newsprint, print media, to manipulate people's ideas and emotions. And he continued right up until the 1930s and 40s. In recent times, we have, like in the last week or two, we have the Facebook scandal, where Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, was brought to the carpet. Actually, he's been brought to the carpet over the last several years over mistruths and lies and deception that came from the previous American president's administration, where certain information was presented in such a way where it was very misleading and deceptive, and it was basically, some of it was fact, it was patent lies. A woman by the name of Haugen is a whistleblower, and she came from Facebook, and she conveyed how Facebook business model relies on constantly tweaking the algorithms to keep the people engaged. So when we're talking about algorithms, like for example, you are seeing, when you're seeing a Facebook page, you're basically talking about, or you're looking at information. The algorithm is a software in the background that notes your responses through your text entry, and it changes comments that come forward. It manipulates information such as ads that are on the page, and it exposes you to information you didn't realize that you had signed up for, so to speak.
David?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, you got a couple of comments here.
Go for it.
Jan says, I think you said hierarchy doesn't recognize the astral plane because they've ascended it. Yet for the service workers, it seems like a necessary outlet for influencing change. The astral plane seems particularly gummed up right now. Do you feel there are specific ways to work with it, or is it best ignored? For me, it sometimes creates an uncomfortable feeling. I seem to sense this activity, clearing of its miasmas or dysfunction at times. It's unpleasant.
Oh, you just said a mouthful. Yes, the astral plane to the hierarchy does not exist because they've completely transcended it. That is a factual statement, because if you think about when you go through the path of probation and discipleship and then an initiation, what you're learning to do, you're basically conscious of this dynamic, what's going on. And when you get up to the stages of advanced discipleship or accepted discipleship, going forward to initiation, you're pretty conscious of the fact that you're working with thought form energy. You're working with emotional energy from the astral body. And yes, you have your own Maya, glamour, and illusion transform. So to make the story short, you have to get past those completely and to see yourself in your pure state as a soul first, and then later on, you're going to see yourself as the monad. And so this is your transformation. You individually are going through that process of your own evolution. Now we have 7.8 billion souls in incarnation sharing the astral plane. And they too have their challenges they have to go through in their own personal path of evolution and growth. Most of them have no concept at all of getting past their thought forms or their energies. They're seeing any reason for that. So the astral plane persists with an expression of will. I I choose to be angry. I choose to express my anger, my selfishness. I choose to continue to do this particular activity, and this causes this consequence in society. I don't care what people think. I just do what my own selfish thoughts think. So yes, this selfish energy concept, separative energy, persists. The service workers, depending upon their own stage of evolution, are the hands and the feet of the hierarchy. And they, if they could become dispassionate and stand back, so to speak, and become the observer, and they do not engage the astral energies, and they see a higher truth, and they see that the concept of tolerance, acceptance, cooperation, and goodwill are the best way for moving forward. And they espouse those energies, and they help to dispel those energies of deception. So there's obviously much more that could be said on this, but that's essentially the concept that, yes, the astral plane is quite real, and we need it. It's not so much we need the astral plane right now, it's just that we don't know how to get past it. And then when our minds become clearer, that is, our inner planes become clearer, and then we outwardly see the outer world, we project that outer clarity to the world outside, and that helps transform the world.
David,
Go ahead.
I'm going to skip ahead
Yes.
one comment here, because what Yvonne put in there is apropos to what Jan has here. Yvonne says, join the Glamour Busters webinars, but what she's referring to is DK actually has meditations for individual glamour, for group glamour, and for world glamour. And Michael Robbins and Tuia Robbins and Olivia Hanson have made that into part of their Ask program, the glamour webinars. They used to try and do them every Friday, but they've slowed down now, and there's usually 2 of them a month. That's what Yvonne is talking about there. And if you want me to, David, I can put the link to the Makara page so they can see some information on that.
Oh yeah, please put that in the chat, of course. Yes.
Okay, so there are mechanisms that DK has given us to
That's
work
right.
on the glamour. So
Exactly,
right.
that's correct. And I'll be talking also about the technique of light a little bit later in this talk too. So we'll get to that also.
Which is part of that. So
that's
okay.
Right.
So thank you, Yvonne, for your comments there. And then Karen says that she appreciates the current references and examples that you're giving us.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, one of the just as an aside, in putting together the 10 seed groups, I can just talk about the dry information about GK and Alice Bailey said the seed group number 1 through to 10. This is what the seed group is and what he said it will be and what it should be and the challenges and everything. And that would just be dry information. What I'm trying to do is to also bring in real world examples, which means current events, because we have an outstanding or standing out is a better way of putting it, astral plane is going on right now. And that most of humanity is aspiring for moving from the astral plane consciousness, the concept of reactivity, to the concept of becoming responsive, which is more a mental plane construct or a mental plane orientation. So, and there's so many people in the world today, many more than were, say, 75 or 100 years ago, who are meditating, who are bringing forth a mental understanding and perception of events and situations, and it is stimulating their mental plane. They're working with a higher vibrational energy, because the mental plane, remember, has 3 different levels, has the concrete mind, has the abstract mind, and then of course the soul shares up there with the causal body, and etc., and connecting with the lower aspect of the spiritual triad. So the concept is you want to connect with the soul, and that and that is through meditation. And so many people, when they meditate, do not understand that. And I mean, unless you're studying the material directly, we use the term soul within the esoteric community, the Bailey community, the Theosophical community, but they don't always. That's not always a term used in other aspects, even though they may be contacting what we know as the soul or the force of light and love and the will to good. These are higher energies which are people are striving to bring forth to the lower planes and purify them and ultimately dissipate them. This is part of the great challenge we're involved with here. So any other comments or questions before I go on?
No, that's all I see right now.
All right. So some of the activities of the trained observers in today's world here in the 21st century, we have journalists, we have think tanks, we have individual thinkers who have addressed the problem of corruption in government. It's largely expressed through the media posing questions, fact-checking, and challenging anybody who is not practicing integrity, accountability, transparency. And incidentally, I'm going to be using those terms, integrity, accountability, and transparency in many other talks in the future too. So those are main, you can also put ethics in there too, a sense of ethics, as main driving spiritual forces for causing humanity to move forward. For commentators who are citizens or NGOs, they represent themselves through blogging and websites expounding on progressive and conservative ideas. So the think tanks, very conservative think tanks and very liberally think tanks. Incidentally, there's thousands of think tanks between America and Europe, and they provide policy. They even write legislation for congressmen and senators, and provide strong background and information about a particular subject or matter, and therefore they influence humanity that way. Additional work of the journalist, broadcast journalists, or the written or the print media journalists, is to conduct investigations into a person or group within a corporation or government with the purpose of exposing corruption, as I just said. And a famous example of this was when two investigative journalists who investigated and broke the story of the Watergate scandal back in the early 1970s. Through their efforts, they exposed corruption and they helped bring down President Richard Nixon in 1974. So this is an outstanding example of how corruption was addressed. The light of truth was brought forth. So you have an esoteric concept which came into the public eye through these two investigative journalists, Bernstein and Woodward, I believe their two names were. And anyhow, that came into the lower 18 subplanes and brought down a president of the United States. And it's also happening in today's Congress here in the United States, where the US Congress, the House of Representatives is investigating the January 6th insurrection and about who was responsible for it, who was behind it. And they are attempting, quote unquote, objectively to bring forth information about truth about what really took place and who were the major players to make that happen. A subtle point to consider that journalists or pundits and politicians, they use media to discuss social issues such as on guns, COVID, and how X person in society was impacted on whatever situation. There's a discussion and tension created about an issue when they discuss this, but was the issue resolved? And this is part of the national conversation. Does it fester and become another issue that stays with us and doesn't surface again? Tension remains, and what of the residual energy of the issue? Was it integrated where the people feel complete? Not likely. Like for example, with the insurrection, we have certain violence took place. People died that day in the Capitol, and there's complete denial on certain websites and certain people in Congress that say this did not happen this way, and they want to have a completely different discussion about what took place. And this causes continual tension within society that this problem is not resolved and it continues. So this leads to the larger question of discerning truth, or expanding on this concept further. We've established the activities of the trained observers is closely connected with the hierarchy's task of dissipating world illusion. We know that illusion by its nature blocks the truth, but attracts the opposite energy, that is the light of the soul. When so aligned, the soul pours forth light and illumination into the consciousness. Today, upon the physical plane, the emergence of light and illumination are in so many places. It takes the form of countering the dark forces of deception everywhere, particularly in the media. For a deeper, more esoteric discussion, GK outlined 3 major long-term tasks for the trained observers in externalization of the hierarchy that he suggested that need to be accomplished. Task number 1, disciples must learn the significance of illumination received in meditation and the necessity to work with the light as a group for the dissipation of glamour. Working as a group to dissipate glamour, well, you just mentioned that with Makara, with the Ask group that is working with talking about what glamour is, examples in the world, and going through meditation to just dissipate this energy. Later, when the new civilization is appearing, this will facilitate the task of dissipating world glamour and illusion more rapidly by groups and key persons as points of energy through which the force of the Christ will be focused. The second task of this group of trained disciples, trained observers, disciples, is to act as a bridge for forces which are seeking etheric expression and which emanate from soul levels via the mind. Paradoxically, the astral plane is a definite state of awareness, even if it has no true being. It embodies the great creative work of humanity down the ages via the sacral and the solar plexus centers. GK said, when the energies finding expression through these 2 centers have been transmuted and carried to the throat and the heart by advancing humanity, then the foremost people of the race will know that the astral plane has no true existence. Now here, I would interpret that saying by advancing humanity. Well, we're talking about someone who's skilled in meditation or knows how to connect with the higher planes and bring forth higher understanding about what glamour and illusion is, even if they may not use that exact vocabulary. From this, we understand that the astral plane in its present state blocks the forces seeking etheric expression. This would seem to be revelatory for the meditator when illusion is removed and clear seeing and direct knowing is present. The third task of the trained observer lies in a more distant future, where the great controversy between those who embody the consciousness of soul aspect of deity, that is, the forces of evolution, and those who were similarly representative of the matter aspect of deity, that is, the forces of involution, will be resolved. So symbolically speaking, these tasks represented the right and the left-hand paths during the Atlantean civilization. And depending upon where you read it in the esoteric teachings, you will see that today's world, or a lot of the people that are, quote, incarnated or in incarnation today, are basically recapitulating the Atlantean consciousness, but it's sped up due to the stimulation of hierarchy. And it's also sped up due to the individual's own capacity for connecting with their own inner self. It's a very, how should I put it? It's a very complex subject with many, many different forces and energies which are at work today. And during the Atlantean civilization, tens of thousands of years ago, the astral plane was primary, the energy going on. The mental plane was largely dormant, although it was in an infancy. And today, now the astral plane is still existing, yes, but it is now rapidly being transcended by those who are connecting with and becoming mental or more mental in their nature, which mental in this case, meaning they're making more soul contact, because the soul is where the mental plane begins and continues. Okay, then as in now, then as in the Atlantean civilization, as in now, white and black magic were brought into conflict with each other, and the pairs of opposites became active factors in consciousness for advanced humanity. Hence the task of the hierarchy to free the souls of men from the surrounding glamour and to enable them to achieve liberation. So here we are once again, where we have the esoteric teachings, are the esoteric schools, as I mentioned before, are forward. Esoteric knowledge is available to humanity. It's becoming mainstream. People are meditating. People are becoming mindful of their own consciousness for the first time. And they're aware that their thoughts do have energy, that their thoughts have influence, and they are becoming mindful, using that exact word brought forth by Thich Nhat Hanh, for example. And there's other people, Eckhart Tolle also brought forth that concept. So it's in the mainstream media that we are moving from the astral reactivity to the mental responsiveness and becoming observers on the inner and the outer planes. Any questions or comments?
No, I don't see anything right at this moment.
All right. Continuing. The trained observers are functioning to make sense and communicate the new emerging vision, which is happening globally. In a world of dwindling resources through overpopulation and overconsumption, the world's ecosystem is not sustainable. Currently, the world is run by those political and economic entities who use their resources to achieve and maintain supremacy by using technology as tools to facilitate division and competition and rivalry. Needless to say, their selfish interests are not in the interest of overall humanity, nor for enabling the plan. Examples of this: technology is used to make guns and bombs and to make a mass media that perpetuates the abuse of information, deception, and misleading information, or even devastating places in the environment to extract resources for fulfilling a limited economic agenda. So the media is being used once again to expound, the people that have the power right now and the influence are the ones that are manipulating us and continuing to use the media for saying we need to have guns, or we need to defend the Second Amendment and keep it intact and not change it for any reason whatsoever. Or we need to not enact environmental legislation that is going to affect people's lives in a negative way. It's interesting to note that as technology and information expand, they are a primary means for magnifying a crisis and for causing and speeding up the process of competition, rivalry, and towards our inevitable destruction. It's quite a paradox. In the middle of the 19th century, or the early part of the 19th century, we had the industrialization began. And what this did, it caused people's minds to speed up and says, oh, I can take that technology and apply it toward this, and I can make this move faster. I can make this go to production faster, and therefore I can make more money from this, get more people involved. You see, there's a mental thinking process behind this. And this has been going forward in the last 180 years, 190 years, almost 200 since industrialization really began in the world. And so this has caused, paradoxically, again, a change in the mind of man, women, across all seed groups, across all cultures, and across all governments and economies, and has affected it. The hierarchy has told us that the seed groups are an experiment which has with its objective the manifestation of certain types of energy on the physical plane, which will, when effectively functioning, will produce cohesion and at one-ment and synthesis of humanity. As esotericists, we have to realize that the seed groups that are manifest in the world, which all 10 are actually manifest in the world, are functioning with only a kernel of spiritual realization. with multiple crises occurring across all the seed groups, subjectively and objectively. Most of today's leaders in industry and government are not capable of seeing the global situation as a whole and can only put band-aid solutions or temporary fixes to endemic problems. When considering an emergent vision, we might ask, as humans, are humans yet able to identify what's emerging in the world? And what is the role of the media, whether in print or broadcast media? Presenting humanity with emerging vision by right spokespersons would represent a fundamental shift in evolution, such as moving from a single-celled orientation, that is, for example, a separative mindset, to a multi-celled environment, we, community of nations, for example, working cooperatively together. So this is a theme that I'm going to be putting out through different seed groups going forward in the months to come, that we need to have spokesperson. We have an emerging vision. We're calling it the plan. The plan is emerging in consciousness. And part of the plan is the concept of the seed groups to come forward, the concept of people to meditate and connect with their higher selves, to expand their awareness, to feel great about themselves, to take care of their health, and know the consequences or society's consequences, to offset environmental degradation and the destruction of weaponry and bombs and guns. I mean, these are just many, many, many things to offset separatism, for example. These are many concepts that we don't have good answers for right now that are being put forward out there. We might ask, what does education, politics, and the new economy, science, psychology, and the arts, and the media look like when functioning with ethics involved? We will revisit the theme of emerging vision in future talks as it relates to other seed groups. The concept of a vision statement is a practical, not pie in the sky statement. When it's carefully conceived by the vision writers and thoughtfully expressed, a vision statement defines the overall goal of the civilization and guides the evolution of various peoples for current and succeeding generations. For any of you who have put together, for example, you may have done grant writing, or you have written vision statements. When you concretize the thought form, you're actually putting down on paper or writing on the computer, whatever the mode may be. When you're concretizing those thought forms, they become objective in form, and you're creating and you're putting them out there into the world, and you're sharing those with other people, and other people are so stimulated, however they're stimulated. And so that is causing change. And so that is why we need to have people putting these ideas out in the media and having the trained observers talk about these things and giving them press, as the saying might be. From an esoteric point of view, we have basic desire for soul values such as cooperation, goodwill, and the expression of right human relations to function widely in all the seed groups. So we are hearing this in the civil rights movement, or rights for women, or rights for children. How about rights for teachers to be in school and not being exposed to the COVID virus, or the children being exposed to the COVID virus? How about the rights of these people? That's just the expression and the concept of being inclusive. When you're talking about rights for people and the rights within the people are expressing through movements, we're talking about going toward a concept of unity and bringing people together in cooperation. And this is going toward unity, which is also a very far distant concept of brotherhood and sisterhood coming into society. In the business world, many companies have a mission statement, as I mentioned. Its purpose describes the business does, what the business does, and how it goes about doing it. If you have a strategic plan as a business goal, then it describes a sequence of actions that the business will take and how it reaches its goals. From an esoteric point of view, we have spokespersons representing multiple disciplines and nationalities who present the vision and purpose. With regards to a values assessment, a vision statement will reflect the values that guides the civilization, or it could even be a corporation. And there's actually many organizations within government who have a code of ethics and how they operate. Lawyers have a code of ethics. The medical industry for the MDs, when you become an MD, a medical doctor, you have to take the Hippocratic Oath, which is a code of ethics. It has choices. The vision statement and the code of ethics has choices, decisions, and daily practices, not just for personal behavior, but also for a business entity, but be able to extend those values to other companies and into the future. Describing what a company should be at a time, keeping in mind certain tensions and crises that inevitably will come up. Additional steps to consider might be around what growth, diversification, and transition directions that people should take, and what directions it may be forced to take over the next coming years, 20 years or so in the future. Understand that none of this should be forced, but shown and demonstrated by ethical leaders and spokespersons through their livingness or soul expression. And of course, we're talking about people that are aligned with the higher aspect of the soul. Again, they may or may not be conscious. They're even connected with the soul. They're just open to impression, and they're connecting with the soul energies and bringing forth these energies of cooperation and goodwill and integrity and accountability. And this typically could be done by high functioning disciples, initiates, or masters from all the seed groups. And eventually this will be done in the public eye. And again, we'll be revisiting this theme of emerging vision and ethical leadership in future talks, especially as it relates to other seed groups interacting with each other. Any comments or questions on this aspect?
Nope, not at this time.
All right, let's continue. So I'm putting this section in here. GK did not put this section in the books. Basically, when you're talking about the books, you're talking about the reference material for the 10 seed groups come from Discipleship in the New Age, predominantly volumes 1, and then Externalization of the Hierarchy. I'm putting in the concept of using the esoteric sense as people that are more conscious of their own dynamics, their own energy dynamics, their own emotional and mental thought form dynamics, so they can become more conscious about what they're doing. And they can do this by using what's called or developing the esoteric sense. So what is it? The term esoteric sense denotes a gradually developing spiritual power in the disciple who is strongly at one and aligned with his or her soul. The esoteric sense is about having the ability to continuously live as the soul in the subjective world while also functioning in the objective world. This is a layman's understanding about how to live in the world and not be of the world. To consciously live the life of the soul in the ordinary daily existence and to keep up the energy and sustain the tension. This requires more the energy of the will. So ideally, if you can imagine a pundit, for example, a trained observer who is a broadcast journalist, and he or she is basically talking about certain situation, and they don't have an opinion whatsoever. They were extremely objective, and they are dispassionate, and they are radiating that energy, and you can see it on the TV screen or computer screen, whatever your medium is watching it is. So this is ideally what we're talking about here. It's obviously something to aspire towards. The esoteric sense allows you to live and function subjectively on mental levels and the lower 18 subplanes. The disciple holds an attitude which can orient in both inner and the outer planes. This also means deriving deeper meaning from abstract ideas, connecting with the higher mental plane, and maybe from meditation. Here, the disciple or the meditator could be tuning into the news or listening to a TED Talk, for example. TED Talks are all about, as you know, engaging the mind and thinking very quickly on a particular subject, giving a great overview. This allows the listener to discern the deeper meaning of a given topic. Using the esoteric sense, it allows the individual to possess a constant inner contact with the soul. And this marks a transcendence of personality issues and allows him to have complete control over his emotional life. As a result, he becomes a clearer instrument for enabling the plan, or open to impression, and for hierarchical concepts and impressions to be registered. It allows him to demonstrate love and wisdom in all that he does through goodwill and loving understanding. Basically, we're talking about a concept of radiation, soul radiation. The esoteric sense allows the disciple meditator to tune into the realms of thought and ideas. He can choose those mental concepts and ideals which will be recognized in a world of everyday thinking and living. He'll be able to develop an attitude of mind where he'll be able to orient himself on a high place of inspiration and light and transmit that energy. Using the esoteric sense, he'll be able to communicate with and discover with his fellow workers as they are able to work together in implementing divine intentions. And this could also be working with the first seed group we talked about last month, which is the telepathic communicators too, where the individual or the group with which he's working is connecting telepathically and transmitting these ideas. To cultivate the esoteric sense, meditation is required. As time passes, you'll come to realize that your meditations have caused you to grow spiritually and enables you to have a stronger spiritual orientation. This has resulted in you developing an attitude of the detached observer. Other methods for dissipating glamour will be used using the technique of light that you'll find in the book, the back part of the book of Glamour World Problem. This involves the personality working in close cooperation with the soul by shining bright light onto the deception or the illusion and dissipating it. I provided a handout, which BL, if you could make that link available in the chat, please. There's a handout, techniques for working in consciousness, that is for a list of techniques that can be used. It's more of an abbreviated form of what's in the Glamour World Problem. Of course, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of the technique of light and get more detailed, you can actually read that in the latter, it's approximately page 190 in Glamour World Problem. I don't remember the exact page numbers, but that's approximately it. Does anybody have any questions on the esoteric sense?
We do have a couple of comments here.
Sure.
Jessica says, do you see the whistleblower, Frances Haugen, as a type of trained observer? She presents information in a factual manner in what appears non-emotional and honest. From what I observed, she is shining light in dark places with a high level of clarity.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I completely agree with that statement. I believe that's exactly what she's doing, because all of the depictions I have seen and descriptions, I mean, not that I'm extremely well read, but what I've read on the media so far, that she does not have an agenda except for just simply exposing what was really going on there and the information that was suppressed by Zuckerberg and other executives within Facebook. So she's simply wanting to expose this information. And I applaud her efforts in this. So she is bringing truth into dark places, as you said. Absolutely. Great example.
Okay, and then Jan says this process seems, in a simple understanding, to be a refinement and a development of a greater sensitivity. This is not always easy and seems to be a natural type of development that can't really be achieved by effort.
Okay, let's see if I can abbreviate this. The meditation process. Okay, so you have the let's see, you have the path of liberation, the path of evolution, and you say consciously, it simply says, I want to evolve myself. I want to expand my consciousness. So you discover that meditation is a great way of doing that. Absolutely factual. So you go into meditation and you learn a particular technique, and you first have to learn concentration. Why are you concentrating? Because you have all these thought forms and energies, emotions, everything that is distracting. So to fast forward into the future, perhaps years, you learn meditation practice of spiritual study and service, and you learn to use those things to hone your mind and to focus your mind so that you connect with your true and highest self, which is first the soul and later on it is your monad. But the point is, it'll take lifetimes to achieve full liberation and illumination, but you need to discipline the mind. And as you discipline the mind over time, you will become, when you're actually in meditation, you'll be completely in the subjective environment. When I'm talking about you right now, my mind is in a subjective environment as I communicate to you through this form nature, through this body that you're seeing here, through your camera. You and your mind right now are discerning what I'm saying in your subjective nature, and mentally and maybe even emotionally, you're understanding what I'm telling you or saying, talking to you about. So we're having a subjective experience here in exchange. Eventually, the esoteric sense is that you become conscious of the dynamics working in your consciousness, the forces that are difficult for you to negotiate, to hold together, to discipline, or the forces that you know that you are the soul and you are the light divine and you are love and you are will and you are fixed design, as the saying goes. You are a focused person that way. So you're bringing that objectively out into the world. You are radiating that energy. That is part of the esoteric sense too, where I am taking a subjective reality, knowingness on the inner planes, and I'm bringing that objective into the outer world. And you are conscious of that dynamic. This can also apply to receiving impressions that you're saying, oh, I just got an idea. Let me act this out. Let me go write this down. Let me go email this to somebody, whatever. This is also using the esoteric sense because you're conscious of the dynamic. So that's so to speak, a real world example of how that can work. And eventually in more advanced stages of meditation and connectivity on the inner planes, you will establish what is called a continuity of consciousness, as the saying goes, and you're basically what the experience that you have connecting with your higher self in meditation, you bring that forward constantly. That's your continuity. And you're constantly expressing the esoteric sense where you're aware subjectively and objectively simultaneously. And you become merged with that expression right there. That's sort of a long-winded answer, but that's essentially how the esoteric sense can work objectively and subjectively in your world. Any other comments or questions?
That's all I see right now.
Great. So let me wrap up here by saying, talking about a concept of know thyself. So when I say know thyself, know yourself individually, know yourself as a pundit, know yourself as a trained observer, know yourself as a person who is speaking a truth. You're a spokesperson. You're representing a higher concept. So this is knowing thyself. It's a very ancient concept that goes back literally thousands of years. From the description of what I provided, the trained observer must spiritually know him or herself. This means that he works in the changed field of energy, such as the astral plane, and he must develop an ability to extract himself from the events and occurrences around him, as I've said before, practicing dispassion, for example. He needs to learn to see clearly as the soul sees, free from the limitations of the lower planes. Again, this is the ideal and what we should all aspire towards. On another note, I know that many of you are teachers and are essentially leaders, providing your own influence in your esoteric specialty as you touch others with your own knowledge or the knowledge you know or you've studied. In your own realm, you are helping to manifest the plan through your own service work. When we tune into world events of which we are all a part, our hearts and minds are sincerely impacted by so much glamour and illusion in the world. It should be said that if we want to manifest this brave new world, we must ourselves become agents for change. This requires you, the esotericist, to be clear of who you are when engaging people and situations. And again, when I say the esotericist, I'm saying that you are conscious of your own consciousness. Now, this is an expression that I don't believe Bailey or DK actually use that exact expression, but other people have said this outside of that realm, but it's basically saying the exact same thing. I am conscious that I am a soul incarnate and that my consciousness is saying and doing what it's doing, and then I know and objectively and dispassionately doing what I'm doing, etc. This is what I'm talking about here. As a guidepost, we can look at what's called the rules and commandments of the Yoga Sutras by Patanjoy for practicing right human relations. And of course, the rules or the commandments that come from the Yoga Sutras, there's many different interpretations of this. Alice Bailey has the one in the book called Light of the Soul, and where she goes through all the different, there's 4 books that Patanjoy wrote 2,000 years ago, and that she and DK go through and interpret what each one of those mean. And some of the essence of what these rules and these commandments are talking about from the Yoga Sutras is the concept of practicing harmlessness. This is also, again, by speaking truth through the right use of speech. This is exactly what the trained observer does when he or she is they're writing something in print media, writing a book, or they're a pundit, they're being interviewed by CNN or something, whatever. They need to learn to put aside lower mind biases to contact the soul for discovering truth and inspiration. In our context of today's discussion of the trained observer, this directly relates to the use of speech and imparting truth in all that the trained observer expresses through the medium of the voice and the organ of sound. There is a concept called the abstention from theft. This is not just stealing a physical object. This is the service worker is precise in all of his activities and consciousness, conversations, and directly relates him to not taking or appropriating anything that does not belong to him. This may have to do with plagiarism, for example. There's been certain people in the last few years who have plagiarized speeches, for example, or parts of speeches. I won't use a specific name, although I have it in my mind, but it's just that's just one example. Within the mind must be developed to become telepathically sensitive in 2 directions, towards the world of the souls and toward the world of men. This relates to using the esoteric sense where we live both subjectively and overtly in the world. Again, this is the person practicing accountability, transparency, ethics, and accountability. When the service worker embraces these values, rules, and commandments, he becomes the caretaker of his own evolution, becomes responsible for who and who or she is. This includes being a good steward toward the planet. This is our only home, and we must protect the land, the water, and the air so everyone can flourish in a clean environment, now and into the future. As good stewards, humans stand midway between the hierarchy and the lower kingdoms, the animal, plant, and mineral kingdoms. Lastly, what I would boldly suggest for those people who are so motivated, bring the essence of the higher vision and spiritual values to leaders of the existing 10 seed groups and their subordinates. So this would be to the people in economy, the people that are in economics, people in the political industry, people in the arts, the scientists, the educators, people in the religious community, the scientists, the psychologists. This can be done by identifying those who represent higher vision and values and contact and support and uplift them in their work. Alice Bailey talked about this. I don't remember exactly where, but I believe it was referenced in numerous places that we need to identify those people in the new group of world servers, the service workers, service group workers, and identify the ones that are talking about goodwill and bringing people together, and identify them and uplift them and acknowledge them so that these words, these concepts and ideas are brought forth into the mainstream conversation. And this is the essence of what the trained observer is doing. He or she is working with the national conversation, and basically with present thoughts and ideas, and bringing them forth, ideally in a higher way. Well, thank you for listening. Does anybody have any comments or
Yes.
ideas? Go ahead.
Joanne says, is being conscious of your own consciousness becoming awakened?
It most certainly is. Yes, it is. It is a form of awakening, and being conscious. In fact, I'm being conscious that I'm sitting here right now in front of my computer, in front of this camera, and speaking to you. So I'm conscious of my own consciousness, articulating these words, and you're conscious of your own consciousness, listening to these words and taking this information in and understanding it. So you've had an awakening that brought you to this moment to be able to be consciously aware that you're doing this. So it's a long-winded explanation, but basically we are all part of an awakening, and it is part of the trained observers to help us, quote, awaken or come to an awakening of understanding this concept that we are consciously aware. Other questions, please?
Yes, Jan says, very helpful, David. Your clarity and definition of these current problems that we are in is very helpful. I can certainly see why this is termed as an experiment. Thank you for your insight.